Our next task is to process this transaction. And to do so, we will use a document called Billing Process Steps, which is found on Canvas and looks like this. We will use this, and we will use the home page to determine which window is the proper window to enter this transaction. First, we need to remember that QuickBooks is designed around the special journals concept. Special journals in QuickBooks are just different windows that are designed to handle specific transactions quickly and efficiently. So for the vendors chapter, the special journal windows we'll be using are Enter Bills, Pay Bills, and Write Checks. So these windows are designed so non-accountants can do some of the work in QuickBooks. In other words, if you hire an intern to enter bills into QuickBooks, they don't need to know what accounts payable means because QuickBooks handles the details in the background. So instead of entering all transactions into the journal, which looks like this, you should be familiar with the journal concept. You enter accounts here, debits and credits here, and memos, okay? But we will not be using that for most transactions in QuickBooks because that's too slow. The whole point of the special journals concept is to have windows that are more efficient for entering transactions, such as Enter Bills, which is the first one we will be using. And speaking of that, as an example, the Enter Bills window is only used for entering transactions where we are buying something on account. And the phrase buying something on account simply means we are buying something like a service or a product, but promising to pay later. Now, one reason why I show and use the home page so much is notice you can point to these windows like the Enter Bills window, and it gives you a hint about what the window is for. Notice the tooltip that pops up that says Enter Outstanding Bills from Vendors. Outstanding bills means a bill you are not going to pay right away. So that's one reason or one way you know to use this window only for bills you are not going to pay. So it's super important that you enter transactions in the correct windows in QuickBooks. So back to the transaction. It says, received a bill for utility services from Minneapolis Electric and Gas Company in the amount of $350, reference number 125-55. The bill is due March 3rd, 2019. Terms are net 30 days. Net 30 days means it's due within 30 days of the date of the bill. So let's consult our bill processing steps document to figure out what is the proper window when processing this bill. The first box says we must have a bill to process. Yes, we do have a bill to process because the transaction said received a bill. Remember, a bill is something we receive from a vendor showing how much we owe the vendor. So then we follow the arrow down, and then the question asks us, will you pay the bill immediately? And there's either a yes response or a no response. So we have to figure out, are we going to pay this thing immediately? So we're going to look at the description of the transaction, and notice that nowhere in the description does it say that we are paying. If we did pay it immediately, the transaction would give us a check number and or it would say it was paid immediately. Now, if you want an example of transactions that are paid, I should say bills that are paid immediately, so you can kind of get used to the difference in the wording. The February 25th transaction and the February 26th transactions are paid immediately. So notice it says February 25th, received a bill for $125, paid with check number 5. So in this case, we are paying it immediately. In that case, we would use the write checks window, but we learn about that later. February 26th, same thing. Received a bill from Grayson Graphics, pay immediately with check number 6. So because these two transactions are paid immediately, we would not use the enter bills window. Again, we will learn how to process those later. So the answer is no. We are not paying the bill immediately. So we follow the no arrow over here, and the next box says to use the enter bills window, and it's telling us that behind the scenes, QuickBooks will create a journal entry that looks like this. With either an asset, expense, or draw increasing, and that's a debit if you forgot. And in this case, the debit would be some type of an expense. If you remember from the transaction, looks like we're paying utility services. So I'm guessing that there's probably a utilities expense account or something similar to that in the chart of accounts, depending on how Kristen Reyna, the owner of the business, set up the chart of accounts. Then notice this box is also telling us that there's going to be an increase in accounts payable. And by the way, if you forgot, that's a credit. Some students mistakenly use the enter bills window to try to pay bills. And if you're paying a bill, cash should be going down. But look at this transaction. Cash is not going down. Accounts payable is going up. So this window, enter bills, is the window we're talking about, is only used when you're going to pay later. And behind the scenes, QuickBooks is increasing accounts payable for us. Just remember, QuickBooks does the debits and credits in the background behind the scenes, and we won't see it unless we run a journal report, which we will do after this transaction is entered into QuickBooks. So now it's a good time to go enter this transaction. Remember, here's a transaction into QuickBooks. And we said, according to our bill processing steps document, we're going to use the enter bills window. So the enter bills window is right here. Remember, it says enter outstanding bills from vendors. Bills we're not going to pay right away. And notice where the cursor is blinking. That's in the vendor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start typing Minneapolis, M-I-N. And now that it's selected, I can hit Tab. Now notice the date field is selected. Now this is really important for efficiency. You should type the date of February 1st, 2019 using your 10 keypad, and the most efficient way to type it is 02 for February, 01 for the 1st of February, and then 19 for 2019. Now watch, as I hit Tab on the keyboard, it's going to change it to 02, 01, 2019. Now let me change it back to the original date of 04, 06, 2020. So here's how most students would try to change the date. They click here, and then they're going to click back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then they find the day 15. So that took 15 clicks, whereas I'm going to change it back 04, 06, 20. If I hit Tab and I type 02, 01, 19, and then Tab. So it only took me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keystrokes. Okay. So now some students will ask, well, why are we doing transactions in the past? Well, a lot of times when you take over a company's accounting records, the reason you're taking it over is because the previous bookkeeper or accountant screwed everything up. So oftentimes you have to go back for years and enter past transactions again. So you do need to be able to be efficient in entering the transaction dates. All right, let's see what else we got. reference number 125-55. So that's just like the reference number or the bill number that you got. 125-55. You would need to know that if you ever needed to call Minneapolis Electric and Gas, they'd say, well, what's the bill number you're talking about? And you would give them that information. It's for $350. Now I'm going to tab. Now notice how the date updated, that the bill is due on March 3rd. It automatically went to March 3rd because the net 30 days is already set up correctly. So 30 days from the date gives us March 3rd. And notice the net 30 days was defaulted to this vendor. So we don't have to change that. Now the only thing else we need to do, and we're done with this transaction, is choose the account down here. Now I'm going to pretend I forgot. And I'm going to try to save and close, or save up here, or save and new. Now when I do that, QuickBooks will not let me save it because you have to assign an account. If you don't assign an account here, it would be like creating a journal entry but not assigning an account to one of the debits or credits. So I'm going to save, and it says, whoa, you must assign an account for this transaction. All right, last thing we need to do, what are we paying? Or what's this bill for? Utilities. So let's look to see if there is utilities expense or something similar. Now remember, this is the chart of accounts. And the order that the accounts are listed in are assets first, then liabilities, then equity, then revenue. One thing you're going to have to get used to is QuickBooks calls revenue income, and then expenses. So the reason I tell you or remind you about the proper order is if you got a huge list, and this is kind of a small list as far as companies go, if you're looking for an expense, it's at the bottom. So don't just start at the top and start reading them all. It's going to take you forever. So since it's an expense, we're just going to zip down to the bottom, and there's utilities expense. I can click it, or since the cursor's in the field, I can type it. There we go. Now I can hit tab, and the transaction is done. Now there's three ways to save. If I want to save and leave this window open, I click here, which is what I'm going to do. If I wanted to save and I'm done with the enter bills window, I would click save and close. If I want to save this transaction and enter another one in the same window, again this window is enter bills, then I click save and new. But I already saved it by clicking the save button. And I wanted to leave it open for a reason. So now what I'm going to do is, just for fun and basically for learning purposes, I want to open up a journal report for just this date to see what the actual debits and credits are. So to run a journal report, we go to Reports. Who runs reports for the journal? Just the accountant. So we go down to Accountant and Taxes, and then we click on Journal. Now we need to know the dates that we want to run it. So notice the dates field is highlighted, but I want to change the from and the to be February 1st. Both of them February 1st, so I can ignore all other transactions. I don't want to have to weed through a bunch of transactions. So the most efficient way, since I'm here, since this is highlighted, I hit tab 02/01/19. I tab, and I want to run it for the same date, so 02/01/19. And at this point I can hit tab, which will refresh, or I can click this refresh button. Since I'm here with a cursor, I just like to hit tab. And then here we go. Here's all the transactions we've entered for February 1st, which is just one. And then let's look at the debits and credits. Now remember, we said, according to our bill processing steps document, there should be the debit should be an asset, expense, or draw. So let's see if a debit was, well, here we go. The debit, we can widen this column kind of like Excel. You click this until, or you move the cursor over this until it becomes a double arrow. Then you drag left or right to widen it. Anyway, the debit is utilities expense, so that's good. Now, one thing that drives me crazy is that for whatever reason, a lot of times QuickBooks will put the credit first and then the debit. I can't stand that. Anyway, let's double check our bill processing steps document. Notice that the enter bills window is supposed to increase accounts payable with a credit. And it did. Accounts payable increased with a credit. So we entered the window and, we entered the transaction in the proper window. Remember, this transaction, the result was supposed to be to increase expense, a utilities expense, and increase accounts payable since we are not paying the bill yet. And let me go back to the enter bills window. So remember, this is the transaction that we entered and saved. Notice there's $350 here and here, but nowhere does this window ask us to assign accounts payable. How come? All we had to do was select utilities expense. Well, think about it. This enter bills window is only for transactions, in other words, bills, that you're not going to pay right away. If you're not going to pay it right away, then that means anything entered in this window is going to increase accounts payable. So your intern only has to know to assign the proper account. They don't need to know accounts payable or accounts receivable or anything like that. So remember, QuickBooks is designed for non-accountants to be able to do a lot of the stuff, not all of the stuff, but a lot of the stuff that's done in QuickBooks. And then I'm going to save and close, and then I'm going to close out this journal because we don't need it anymore. So the whole big spiel about this long video was, if you get a bill and you're not going to pay it right away, enter it into the enter bills window. Later on, we'll find out when we use the pay bills window and when we use the write checks window.